So my name is Nick Wurst. I'm a member of the Independent Socialist Group here in Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm also a member of Transportation Communications Union. And I'm talking with Johnna Bacelis, right? That's how you pronounce it?
Yes.
Yeah, Johnna Bacelis. And Johnna, I mean, we're talking with you today partially because of some of what you said at a public meeting that we helped organize to help support the nurses striking at St. Vincent Hospital in Worcester, because you are a striking nurse. So, I was wondering if, you'd just like to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about yourself and how long you've been a nurse, how long you've worked at St. Vincent.
Yeah, so I've been a nurse for 33 years. I've been at St. Vincent's a little bit less than 20. I work in the IV department, and that certainly facilitates me knowing a lot of the staff because I go through the whole building.
Mm-hmm.
The beginning of my career, I worked at Providence House, which was a sister company of St. Vincent's. So when I wanted to make the transition to hospital, to a hospital, it was just natural that I go to St. V's. And at that time, they had a very good reputation. The care was wonderful. All the reasons why you would, as a nurse, want to work somewhere. So it was just natural that I went there. Unfortunately, since being there, things drastically changed. Right before I came was the first strike. And that happened because that was in 2000. I believe. Yeah, I think 2000. Yeah, because it was 21 years ago.
Yeah.
And that came about because there was a big change, and Tenet bought St. V's and was implementing many, many changes. And most of it was, because of financial, it was better to make the decisions they were making for their financial interest. Mm-hmm. Fast forwarding to now, you see the same things, only more drastically. Mm-hmm. Everything is, and I understand they are a for-profit company. Personally, I don't really know if I know that I don't really think that hospitals should be for profit.
Right.
But we live in a country, in a culture that money, unfortunately, is very important. We all need it to survive, but when you start putting it above very important things like patient care and patients' lives, then you're on a very slippery slope. Because right. At what point do you say that the money is really worth what we're cutting, what we're doing here? And in most instances, it's not, and being in the building and seeing them slowly erode, it just has negatively impacted more than anybody, the patients, but also the nurses, because you're trying to make up for those shortages, mm-hmm. when there's not enough people to wash equipment, you're washing equipment, and you're running over here to get supplies to another floor. But in doing all of that, that's taking time away from the patient and the care that you're able to provide for that patient. Mm-hmm. And it's sad. It's very sad. And when people say, well, I had my light on, why didn't you come? Well, because I was 2 floors down trying to get a turkey sandwich for this other patient who just got admitted, because there's no food on the floor other than a saltine cracker, and they're hungry. And you feel terrible. Like, what do you say to somebody in the middle of the night? It's sad to see how things slowly have progressed. It wasn't overnight. It was slowly, they have diminished the secretary at night. No, we no longer have that, because I work 11 to 7. They have taken away, PCAs. They've taken away sitters. So now you have a patient who is unsafe, needs a sitter. So the nurse is now outside the door trying to do her documentation, but trying to watch that patient so they don't fall. You know, and when you're one person, you can only do so much, you know,
Right.
you can't get blood from a stone. There comes a point where you just say, there's nothing more that I can do to ensure that all these pots that I'm stirring on the stove don't overflow, you
Right.
know? But it's been a slow progression, and we've seen how they, you know, we have staffing, and they, you know, that is one of the points. They wanted us to go to the table the other day and talk, so they did. But we have seen them continuously not adhere to the contract, and that's part of the problem.
Right.
So, you know, one of the big thing that they presented at this meeting on Monday was that we have this committee made up of, you know, some of us, some of them, and somebody impartial to ensure that they adhere to the contract. Well, why, first of all, why is it even a question? Why don't you just adhere to the contract? I have to adhere to the contract. Why aren't you just doing it? Why aren't you honoring what you signed off on paper, you know? Why do we need a committee to ensure that you do the right thing?
Right.
That's silly. And, you know, historically, and the unsafe staffing sheets will prove that historically they don't adhere to the contract, and that is part of the problem. We can't take them at their word if even in the contract they don't adhere to it. So if they say, don't worry, we will do the right thing. Well, you really haven't done the right thing. Even when it was in black and white and you signed that contract, they historically don't do the right thing until we hold their feet to the fire and make them do the right thing.
And
I'm
that's,
a nurse.
yeah.
I don't want to go into battle against them, but that's what I'm forced to do.
Right. And so that's, you know, so you talked a little bit about sort of how conditions have been deteriorating at St. Vincent for a long time now, with the you know, cuts to staffing, various positions being cut, and sort of their job responsibilities now being put on the nurses. And, you know, so there's also the pandemic obviously has gone on. And I think for some people, maybe they think that, or it, people see the chaos that it caused in the hospitals and things like that. But even before the pandemic, it wasn't all, you know, it wasn't all sunshine and roses, right? What were some of, you mentioned some of the things you've seen them take away, some of the problems you've seen happen over your time at St. Vincent's, and what, you know, what did, when the pandemic hit, that all got worse, didn't it? And what did it look like from the inside, you know, of the hospitals when the pandemic hit? Because I remember, you know, a year ago now, we were hearing about not enough, you know, masks. We were hearing about people having to reuse protective equipment. We were hearing about nurses being laid off, that there was a fight to try and retrain nurses, and keep them on the floor, and instead the company was laying them off. So could you talk a little bit about what the pandemic kind of has looked like so far in the hospital, and what kind of conditions that's looked like?
So, I mean, as I said, you know, things were already, like I said, you know, we were kind of reaching bare bones before the pandemic.
Right.
Then the pandemic hit, and they were scrambling because we didn't have enough PPE. We didn't have enough gowns. We didn't have enough masks. They were telling us to, you know, wear the masks for several days in a row, put them in a plastic bag. Then they found out, no, that's going to make, you know, contaminate it. Put them in a Tupperware container, with a hole in the top. But so like I said, I travel throughout the hospital. I go everywhere, every department in the hospital, except for in the operating room. So the expectation for me was when I would go to a floor, they would give me a gown. I'd have to write my name on the gown, hang it in the shower room. And then when I went to the next floor, they would give me a gown. But it was only because I couldn't travel between different floors with a dirty gown. But when I would return, so if I went to 36, I would return to there and put on my dirty gown in the room with everyone else's dirty gown hanging, trying not to rub against it, because then now your personal clothing is contaminated. I could wear the same mask, but for, like I said, several days, several shifts. And it was almost like you'd be like, oh, to get a new one, because you knew that this was not good, we'd say, oh, my strap broke, I need a new one. You know what I mean? Or it got wet, I need a new one. But everything was under lock and key. And you had to, even when they got stock in, everything continued to be under lock and key. You could not get anything without going through whoever the resource nurse was. And, you know, they're your coworkers, they felt bad. They wanted to give you stuff, but everything was counted for. So, you know, it was difficult. And I mean, I got COVID, I got it, I came home, I gave it to every single member of my family got COVID, all 5 of us. And I was one of the first ones at the hospital. I think I was like the 32nd person to get it. And I was told that there was absolutely no way that I could have gotten it at work. And unless I filled out an incident report and could prove what patient I got it from, that I would not get workman's comp, which a week later, when that, I can't remember the name of it, you know, when that money came through,
Right.
and hospital got money for all the patients that died with COVID and all the workers that got COVID, then they said to me, they called me, and after telling me, absolutely not, you will not get workman's comp, you have to use your sick time. And if you don't have sick time, we'll take your vacation and your holiday time. And I said to the woman in human resources, who I thought human resources are supposed to be helpful to the employees, I asked her at the time, I said to her, you know, I'm at home with COVID. Are you threatening me about my sick time? And she said, well, we're just going to take whatever time you have to be able to pay you. I mean, I had enough sick time, but there are people who were out who caught it at work who didn't. But once that stimulus package came through, then they were offering, oh, you can get workman's comp now. Well, I didn't want it then. Let him use my sick time. I earned that sick time. I had 400 hours almost of sick time. Use my sick time. But after I returned, nothing changed. You know what I mean? It continued to be a shortage of PPE, scrambling, trying to figure things out always. I mean, if it weren't for your fellow workers, we would have never gotten through it. And that just made us even stronger. So what they don't realize is, in going through the pandemic, they prepared us for this strike.
Right.
They made us much stronger. After going through that, we could go through anything. And it was difficult. You know, you saw people losing their lives and you were trying to do everything you could, but it was exhausting. I mean, everybody, you know, you'd say, well, where can I get a face shield? People were networking to get your own supplies. They were buying things so that they could go to work to be safe, to do their job. But there was no, you know, there was no even thank you. I mean, anything that they said, oh, one day they said, oh, we're going to give you Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Like it was a great thing. I mean, and it was appreciated, but they didn't pay for that. Dunkin' Donuts donated it to the nurses, and they gave it out under the premise that they were giving that to us. You know, anything that was donated for the nurses, they acted like they gave it to us. They didn't give it to us. Those companies gave it to us. But it was doled out, you know, one by one. you couldn't take more than one and you had to go down and give it, I don't want your stupid pie. Like, honestly, I want supplies. I want a turkey sandwich for the guy that's hungry. I want a blanket for the patient. I don't want a flannel bath towel that we put in sheets and layer because we don't give blankets at the hospital anymore. That's craziness. It's a hospital. People are sick.
It's amazing. It says, I think it says a lot about, you know, the culture, the place our society is in, our politics, our economic system, capitalism, where, you have all these politicians, all these, statements from CEOs and important people calling people essential workers, celebrating, essential workers and thanking their frontline heroes and things like that. And then this is how they're actually, being treated. This is, you call people essential with one side of your mouth, and then out of the other side of your mouth, you're counting to you're forcing them to reuse PPE. You're bean counting over the equipment, and I think it really says something that this is a hospital, right? If hospitals were this unprepared for the pandemic, if hospitals, if healthcare facilities were scrambling so much to get medical PPE, what does that say for what happened in, for the rest of society? These would be the places you'd expect to be the best prepared, right?
Absolutely.
And it's totally absurd. And so, like you mentioned, the sort of conditions in the hospital. And I think it's fair to say, not just in the pandemic, but even like you were talking about before, after Tenet bought the hospital, that it's really sort of forced or it's created the conditions where workers in the hospital sort of know each other and know what's going on and what the problems are in the workplace. And so you're a member of the Massachusetts Nurses Association, and what through your time as a member, what sort of things have you seen the union sort of fight for its members on? I remember the union was a big part of the Yes on Question 1 campaign, which was a few years back, a referendum in Massachusetts trying to get safe patient limits as a state law, essentially, or safe staffing limits. So what other sort of things have you seen, through your years, the union sort of trying to get done, trying to fight for its members?
So in our hospital, obviously they negotiate our contract,
Right.
And in that contract, I was on the negotiating committee once. It's difficult because you're fighting tooth and nail, you know what I mean? And going back and forth. But definitely the contract, every time we have a new contract, they try and facilitate somewhere, somehow, something better. Because that's what you're looking for. That is certainly a challenge. The monthly labor management meetings is an opportunity for them to be with management in the same room and say, you haven't done this. You have to make sure you're doing this the correct way. But on a day-to-day operation, the union ensures that we, are able to bid on jobs fairly, because there've been issues where they've tried to hire people from outside of the hospital, and you might have somebody in the hospital who isn't trained in that area, but might have worked in the hospital for 10 years. And they, we as a union want to ensure that those people get trained if you want to advance or go to a different area or whatever. So I've seen how they have ensured that happens. Safety on the floor. I mean, the safe staffing forms. It's a thankless job that they do, and it's daily. Something is going on there every single day that they then address in labor management and subsequently with a new contract. And typically, St. Vincent's nurses have been known for not going for money. We're not, and nothing against anybody else. We typically are not, our first thing is usually not money. But like it or not, there are two other hospitals in the city, and St. Vincent's, in order to attract and retain staff, needs to stay competitive with them.
Mhm.
But that is not always our first ask. Our first ask is always historically been for safe staffing. And I've seen how year after year, they just keep ringing that bell and trying, like a drip in the sink, just trying to wear them away until they give us what we need. It's not even a want, it's a need. And that's what I don't think that they get. We don't want to have to go out there and ask for this, but we need it.
Right.
I don't know why they're so obstinate and just don't want to listen. I mean, you're not on the floor. And years ago, you would see administration come around and, hi, how you doing? They would have monthly meetings with staff. None of that happens now. None of it.
And so you mentioned safe staffing, and I guess maybe for people who aren't familiar, because I know this has been a big deal in California. It's been a big deal in Massachusetts. But what is this sort of safe staffing that we're talking about, right? What do you mean when you're saying that?
So typically a nurse's assignment now on a lot of the floors is 1 to 5, sometimes 1 to 6 if it's a code red and they have sent nurses home and now they don't have enough staff. You have to go over the numbers.
So that's one nurse taking care of 5 patients, and it's not
Right.
just when we're saying taking care of, it's not just you check on them every so often, and you go to them when they need help and things like that. It's more involved than that, right? You're trying to track the progress of their symptoms, look out for early warning signs. You have to pay a lot of attention to these individual patients, right?
Well, so typically you're going in what doesn't matter the shift. When you hit the floor, you're going in and you're having vital signs taken. You're going to make a general assessment right at the beginning of your shift. And then every 2 hours, ideally, you're going to be assessing them. But because you've made your initial assessment, now you might be going in to give medicine, but you're still assessing them when you're in there. And that's a critical thing. That's what nurses do. You need to be able to go and look at a patient and, okay, I'm watching for this, I'm watching for that. What's going on? Am I seeing any changes? And you're giving them medicine, you're evaluating, okay, I just gave you some pain medicine. Has it worked? How are you feeling now? You might have to, hang a medicine like an intravenous medicine. At the same time, if they're on a heart monitor floor, a telemetry floor, you're monitoring continuously. When you're not in the room, you're monitoring their heart monitors. And there are certain bells and whistles that go off for certain things, but you're continuously monitoring that. There usually is not more than a 2-hour time frame that you don't go past that 2-hour time frame without going in that room again. Even if they're sleeping and you're just looking in on them, somebody has to have eyes on that patient. But in the middle of that, that's smooth sailing if nothing goes wrong, but that never is the case. You might have somebody whose heart rate is elevated. Now you have to call the doctor. You have to get a medicine for that. Now your one patient is leaving. So that patient's leaving. Now another patient is coming. So really, although you're still at a 1 to 5 ratio, this really is patient number 6.
Mm.
Now you have someone who's confused. You're trying to keep them in bed and not have them fall and reorientate them. Now you have another patient who is withdrawing at this. So this is all simultaneously happening, and you're still doing your basic nursing, which is going in and checking vital signs, monitoring. So it's just continuous. It doesn't stop. It doesn't stop. And I mean, nowadays, again, we live in a capitalistic society. It's about money. You are not admitted into the hospital nowadays unless you are very sick. You need hospital care to be admitted, because anything that can be done outpatient is done outpatient. Years ago, people would come in, they'd have a knee done, a knee replaced, they'd be in the hospital for 2 weeks. Now you're in the hospital for 2 days.
Right.
You're not staying in the hospital and being admitted unless you really, truly are sick and need care. The other reason why the nurses are continuously in and out of the rooms is because you're continuously documenting. And part of that is in the computer, which, you know, in the age of progress is a good thing. It needs to happen. It used to be on paper. That's no longer the case. But in doing that, you're also generating a bill. So your documentation every 2 hours is going into that system, and that's generating the bill. You've given a medicine, that's in the system, that's documented, we're scanning them, and that's making it safer for the patient and for the nurse to administer those medications. But it's also ensuring that that bill is generated. You know, so everything you're doing is documented for the well-being of the patient, but also to generate that bill.
Right. So the hospital gets paid.
Right.
So,
exactly.
And so this question of safe staffing really is about ensuring that there's enough nurses to give quality care to the patients that are being admitted. Because like you said, these aren't patients that are coming in, you know, with hangnails, right? These are people with serious problems that they're facing that require, you know, you talked about these visits, you know, at least every 2 hours, but you're not just poking your head in the door, right? You said you're documenting, you're observing, you know, you're giving medicine, all this other stuff. And so with this fight for safe staffing, it's, you know, I think it's fair to say that it's really a fight to make sure that every patient gets the amount of attention that they need in order to recover. And so that's what the fight was about with the ballot question, and we'll talk a little bit about the strike going on right now, but that's been a central part of the strike that's going on is around the question of safe staffing. So you said there's currently sort of a 1-to-5 ratio that is not really a 1-to-5, because also, like you described earlier, it's not just that you're a nurse looking after these 5 or 6 or 7 patients. You're also now doing work that wasn't originally your work to do, like cleaning, you know, secretarial, clerical stuff. So it's not just that they're playing fast and loose with how many patients they're assigning you, but on top of that, you're also dealing with all this extra work that's keeping you from paying attention to the patients and tracking the patients. So what has the, you know, what has the M&A, what have the nurses been, what do you think safe staffing, safe patient limits looks like?
I mean, ideally, you know, we're hoping for a 4-to-1 ratio. In the you know, the higher acuity areas, the ICU, the PCU, they need lower ratios too. The ER, the ER needs staff. You know, they're bombarded, and you can't stop the ambulances from coming. The people just keep coming. I think that unfortunately, like you mentioned, you know, there was that bill that people got to vote on. I think the hospitals in Massachusetts got on the train real early. You know, it was, I think, the beginning of the summer, late spring, and they just hammered away. And I think that they really misled people. I can't say that they lied, but they definitely, you know, made things sound differently. And I think a lot of people who were watching television, especially older people who vote, really got deceived and got frightened. I had many people call me and said, I don't understand.
Right.
But even explaining it, you know, we were, I think, unfortunately, a little bit late. And certainly they had a lot more money to put into that campaign than we did. We were outgunned big time, you know. But it was definitely unfortunate, because I don't really think that a lot of people understood what they were voting for. And they were really voting against their best interest, because at the end of the day, we're all going to be in the hospital at some point. Someone we love is going to be in the hospital, and their only connection to the nurse is going to be that call light. And when you push the call light and nobody comes, it's not because we don't want to, it's because there's just not enough.
There's too many call lights going on.
Yeah, you can only spread so thin, you know. And it just has gotten progressively worse. And that's why we're saying, you know, we can't do it. You can only do that for so long without something bad happening. And we as nurses take an oath. You know, we care about the patients. I don't care about the bottom line. It's not my job. I'm not a bean counter. I'm there to take care of the patient. And at the end of the day, if I'm telling you I cannot do it safely with the resources you're giving me, why would I make that up?
Right.
You know what I mean? To what end am I going to make that up?
I, you know, myself and other members of ISG, you know, we back when the pandemic hit, we participated in the car caravans outside of St. Vincent, and before that, we some of us worked actually for the campaign, the Yes on One campaign. Some of us volunteered, you know, knocking on doors. And yeah, you know, when I was knocking on doors, when I was talking to people about it, everybody had seen one of the ads. Everybody had seen something from the hospital corporations. And I think you're right. They had tons and tons of money to throw out there. They misled people. And I think it's important to remember with all of this stuff that, you know, this is when the teachers have a saying, when they, you know, get into it with the school committee and things like that, teachers' working conditions are the students' learning conditions. And it goes you know, I think it's really the same for nurses, right? Nurses' working conditions are the conditions that patients recover in. If you want quality care, if you want people, you know, to get the attention and the care that they need, you need to have nurses that, you know, not only have a balanced workload, right, but also are taken care of in terms of how well they're paid, you know, their benefits, their time off, their sick leave, things like that. Because if the nurses aren't being taken care of, how can they be expected to take care of, you know, to give it their all, you know, to work, you know, 16-hour shifts, taking care of other people. So we've talked about the strike a little bit. So just for people who maybe are outside of Worcester, outside of Massachusetts, who haven't heard about this, although it's been amazing. You know, I've lived in Worcester my whole life. I grew up here, and normally you say you're from Worcester, and people say, "Oh, you know, I'm from Worcester, Massachusetts." Oh, how close is that to Boston, right? Everything's Boston, right? But there's even been some coverage of this strike nationally. I know Labor Notes, which you know is a publication that follows sort of labor activism and stuff around the country, you know, wrote an article featuring, you know, interviewing some of the nurses at St. Vincent's about the strike. But just for people who maybe haven't heard of it, so this strike, you know, just some of the basic facts before we get into it. It started March 8th. That's correct.
Yep.
It started March 8th. After weeks of negotiation, informational picketing, nurses, ISG members, other people were out with signs raising awareness about the issues. But the strike happened March 8th, which happens to be International Working Women's Day, which I thought was significant because of
very apropos.
Yeah, and now the strike is still ongoing. There's no end date that was set before it. It's now in its 8th, almost 9th week. Is that correct? And
Yep.
there's about 800 nurses who are members of the MNA at St. Vincent's. And so that's the bargaining unit that's on strike. So what was it like in the hospital, in the union? What was it like in the lead up to the strike? What was it like to sort of prepare the workers for the strike? You know, I went to the day before the strike was called. So March 7th, there was a rally organized by the MNA outside of the strike headquarters, which I was actually lucky enough to speak at. But it was hugely powerful, that rally, where there were all these speakers. There were members from other unions, other groups in support that were there. And when we were there, it felt like people had been prepared for this strike, and that they knew it was coming, and they knew what they were getting into. So, you know, what was it like in the lead up to the strike, in the workplace and in the union, and sort of preparing the members for the strike?
So they had been at the bargaining table. I think they went back a month or two before the contract ended to kind of like get a jump start. And, you know, we all would get updates of what was going on. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. But then the fall came, and we realized that things were not going well. Things were not progressing the way they should have been progressing.
When did the contract expire?
So 2019.
So at this point,
January 1st of 2020, we really had no contract.
Right.
Of course,
you've been working without a contract for over a year now, and you know,
right.
for people maybe who aren't in unions, that's actually the same time that my contract expired, and we're still without a contract. But for people who aren't in unions, working without a contract means the old contract is basically still in effect, but you aren't getting things that you might count on from a new contract, such as pay increases to keep up with cost of living, or updates to PTO, or new rules and regulations that maybe the last, have made them, if the need for them has become apparent over the last contract, right? So you're sort of in limbo. and you don't know when you're going to get any of the changes that you need in the workplace. So you've been without the contract for over a year before
Yeah.
this, right?
Yeah. So like I've been a nurse 33 years. I'm at the top of the pay scale. But I have where the rest of the staff, continues to on their year, they get a raise, whatever. Any of us who are at the top of the pay scale, we're getting nothing since the contract ended. No cost of living raise, none of that. Which again, it's important. It's not our number one beef, but it is important to
Right.
stay, stay in the game.
Like you
But
said, that's how one of the biggest problems with understaffing in the US is, why stay in a job that doesn't pay well if you can find another one that pays better, right? How are you expected to keep nurses around, to keep them trained, if St. Vincent's isn't willing to pay? That's only going to hurt the workplace in the long run, because you're not going to be able to attract new nurses and you're not going to be able to keep them around.
Well, yeah, and we've seen that because over the course of the last year, 100 nurses left, and the majority of them were new nurses. Because truly, as a new nurse, I would not tell somebody to come work at St. Vincent's. Why would you, as a new nurse? Why wouldn't you go over to Memorial or UMass, where you're going to get paid more, you're going to have a better work environment, you're going to have better benefits at a lower rate? The only people who are hanging around at St. V's are people who, sometimes it takes you a while to get into a department that you want to be in. So, to leave, you're letting go of all your seniority. When you go for vacation, you're now low man on the totem pole if you leave. Well, and if and there's a level of comfort in working at a place that you've worked for a long time and you like what you're doing there. I'm an IV nurse. I don't necessarily want to go to UMass and work on the floor. But anybody who's new, they got no skin in the game. They're gonna go, and you're not gonna be able to keep them if you're not doing something to keep them. And
Right.
that's, they're penny wise and pound foolish at St. Vincent's, because they're investing money in orientating people. And once those people get 6 months in, they're out the door. So it costs money to orientate people. Why not put a little bit more in there to keep them? It's a revolving door. And that's another thing that's burning the nurses out, because you're continuously orientating people. And then you can't get mad at them when they go, well, I'm going over to UMass. You're like, well, geez, you were really good and I enjoyed working with you, but best of luck. And you can't begrudge them. A lot of them will come back, or they'll stay per diem, and they'll tell us, we like working here better. We like working with the nurses here. It's a different atmosphere, but we have to go there because the benefits are better,
Right. And these are all
Um,
things that could have been addressed in some kind of new contract, right?
Absolutely.
And the
Absolutely.
union was trying to get addressed in negotiations.
Yeah, and they're
So
trying to, they try to explain why those nurses left and make all kinds of excuses. At the end of the day, those nurses will tell you exactly what I just said. That's why they left. But building up, through the last year, building up to the strike, we saw people leaving, and we saw that they were not coming to the table and really bargaining in good faith and making strides in the areas that we indicated were important to us. So the negotiating committee disseminated that information, and were honest and truthful and asked people, what do you want? Tell us, what do you want? Because if now our backs are against the wall, do you want to progress? Because, again, for those people who aren't in unions, you don't just make the decision to go on strike willy-nilly. There's a lot of, information that needs to be put out there, and you have to vote on it. The bargaining unit we voted as a group. It wasn't the negotiating committee. It wasn't the M&A, itself. It was the bargaining unit that voted.
Nurses at St. Vincent.
Right. And you have to have a certain percentage of that bargaining unit has to vote in agreement. And it was overwhelming, the amount of people who opted to go on strike.
And it must have been interesting or difficult or had some challenges to it, because I know in my union, for the course of the pandemic, we've been told no in-person union meetings, no, we're not even doing virtual meetings. And these meetings of the members of the union are supposed to be where we're able to have our say in union business, right? And vote on things like you were talking about, and discuss the problems in the workplace, discuss, violations of the contract, discuss, issues and what we can do about them, what management isn't doing right, things like that. And so was it challenging to sort of organize those kinds of discussions, those kinds of, spreading that information and the members sort of discussing democratically? Was that a challenge with the pandemic going on? I don't know what it was like in your union. Were there still in-person meetings happening? Was it all virtual? Were people still attending the union meetings?
So most of the information from the negotiating committee, there's almost every single floor, not every single floor, but almost every single floor has a rep that is on the negotiating committee. So that rep goes back, and that's part of being a rep, would go back to the floor and tell her coworkers, because you're working together, this is what's going on. And you're seeing them at the, one shift at the beginning of your shift, another shift is going off. Then at the end of your shift, another shift is coming on. And so, kind of like telephone, one by one, the information, gets disseminated. But because we're in person, we're all, at work, it's very simple to do. And much of the time during, lunch breaks, dinner breaks, oh, did you hear? So-and-so came by. And they had, they would print out a lot of information that and it's in our contract, we have an M&A board in all the break rooms. So all of that information could be posted there. So if you were unable to chat with somebody, the information was always up and you could read it. And they would give us a day, a week by week or bi-weekly, whatever happened during negotiations. And at the same time, our managers would send in our emails their version of what transpired, which was vaguely similar, but not really,
right.
Ironically. But yeah, so that's pretty much, it was kind of word of mouth, and like I said, the printed sheets. So that really, the pandemic really did not affect us that bad in that way, because we all see each other. You're always there. You know what I mean? And the people who know information. You know who your leadership is. So, you'd say, well, what did so-and-so, can you go, where's this one? Where's that one? Where's the co-chair? What's happening? And people would just, and of course with social media now, everything's out there, the good, bad, and the ugly.
Right. And so you mentioned that the strike vote, that was, I remember hearing about that from nurses, hearing that, we're probably going to be taking a strike vote, and it's probably going to go yes. And that was a big deal to hear about, because like you said, there's a decision to strike isn't something that's taken lightly. And the strike vote itself wasn't the, we're going on strike. It's, we're willing to strike, and we will if the company doesn't budge. But what was that strike vote like? You mentioned it was overwhelming. What were the results?
I want to say, I get confused with the numbers, to be honest, but I think about 600 nurses voted and 98% of them voted for the strike.
And
There
so,
were some that opted not to vote. But in all truthfulness, we were hoping that taking that vote would send a message to them that we were very serious, but we were still hoping that it would be a way to, for lack of a better term, turn up the heat and
right,
make them negotiate in good faith and get it done. You know what I mean? None of us, although we voted for the strike and we were willing, obviously, here we are, willing to do that, we were still hoping it wouldn't come to that they would be, reasonable, but they weren't. So here we are, 8 weeks later in the middle of a strike.
right. So the strike vote was taken, and like we said, the strike got called March 8th. So now we're in the middle of week 8, and heading into week 9. So there's a lot there that's happened, but sort of how has the strike been going? What's the support looked like from other unions, other supporters from the community? You mentioned recently, within the last few days, that the company finally reached out through a mediator to the union, and we heard made an offer, and that was rejected by the nurses. What was so how's the strike gone so far? What's it been like on the picket line? What was in the most recent offer, and how did the members, how did the nurses react to that offer?
So overall, I mean, being on strike is difficult. At first, the first 2 weeks, we were all charged up. Then we really got into the trenches of the strike, and I would say we hold each other up. One day one person's crying, the next day, and someone's holding that person up, and then the roles are reversed the next day. It's hard. I'm not going to lie to you. It's hard, and it's getting hard now. We're still waiting for unemployment. But we're doing it. We're we're committed. We didn't make the choice lightly. And even on those hard days, you just gotta, this could be a lot worse, and people go through a lot worse. So we'll do what we have to do. It is very energizing. It's great to see my coworkers out there, but when I see other people out there, it lifts you up. You know what I mean? And we've seen like the postal workers come on Thursdays, and various unions. You guys are always there, which is wonderful. But all the different unions supporting us, it makes you feel like you're not alone. You're
Right.
part of a bigger group. You know what I mean? And yesterday they had now I don't want to say their names wrong. The members of the Massachusetts Building Traders Council
Mhm.
went to deliver a letter telling Jacqueline that
That's that's the CEO.
yeah, that they wouldn't be using, they would encourage their members not to use St. Vincent's, which is huge. That's huge, because not only are you getting their support, but now all that really matters to Tenet is money.
Right.
So now you have another layer there that is affecting their income, which is what really hurts them. They don't care about anything else. They really don't. You know what I mean? They care about money. And in doing this, we're taking away, well, not we, but this union is taking away revenue from them.
Right.
So that's a huge thing. But it also just, for your spirit, it lifts you up that somebody is willing to stand next to you and say, it's not all right. What you're doing is not okay. You know, it means so much to us to have other unions and people come and stand with us. Because, you know, sometimes you think like, am I crazy? Why doesn't anybody else get this? And then when you see someone else gets it, it's like, it's just reaffirming that I'm not crazy. I'm doing the right thing for the right reasons. And other people realize that they're not fooling everyone, you know? Unfortunately, like I said, you know, they did go back to the table. They sent out word that they wanted to negotiate again. And they met on Monday. And what they did was they had offered some, you know, money, not complete retro pay, but for the people at the top of the scale, they offered like a lot of money initially to hoping that we wouldn't go on strike and we would just take the money and be quiet and go away, which we didn't do. So all of that money they took away, and they said they weren't going to give us retro, as previously.
This is retro pay, back pay essentially for the, you know, year plus that you've worked without a contract, you know, basically going back and saying you should have been being paid more. So here's that money.
Right. So now they're saying they were going to have it go from last July through the signing of the contract. Now they said they'll just go from January.
So they're actually taking away.
They're taking away things. And what they gave us in return was what I had mentioned at the beginning, is this group who will meet every 3 months and evaluate if they are adhering to the contract. And if they don't for 2 consecutive, you know, quarters, which is 6 months, then they will schedule a meeting to see how to address that. So when all is said and done, it would in essence be about 8 months that they could potentially not adhere to a contract that they agreed to. And then you could meet and see how they would address it and possibly speed up the grievance process. But why do we even need that? Just do what you're saying you're supposed to do. And really, we already have a group that meets monthly and addresses this. So that is just a lot of mumbo jumbo on paper to try and muddy the water and say, look what we've given them. But it's nothing really. It's really, when you dissect it, it's nothing.
What they did is they said, hey, we want to come back to the table. We're willing to give you less money than we were a few months ago. And we're willing to create this whole new layer of bureaucracy and all this red tape that people are going to jump through in order to maybe possibly have a meeting about whether things are being done correctly. You know, you already have that. It's called the union. The union's already there to keep you accountable. And this is what this strike is keeping them accountable. It's amazing because something we've seen throughout this strike is the local media, you know, the Telegram and Gazette, given free press, basically to Tenet, you know, printing all of their sob stories and their side of things. And you know, Tenet's been and St. V's has been doing overtime in sort of presenting this as, oh, we came back to the table and we offered them, you know, this great deal, and they you know, spat in our faces. And when you really get to the heart of it, they took things away and offered something totally meaningless in return.
Exactly.
And you said, so the nurses rejected that offer, and that offer, generous as it was, and the strike is continuing. So was that sort of, did that happen at a meeting of all the nurses?
So what they did,
a vote?
What they did in offering us that, after they offered it, their lawyers asked if we would then be voting if they would bring that back to the membership to vote on to ratify the contract. No, you haven't even addressed the staffing issues. So we had a Zoom meeting that night, and you know, of course, everyone joined on, and they laid it all out for us. And unequivocally, there was not one person at any time that said, I think that we definitely should go for that. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was obviously a no. Our negotiating committee is meeting this week. They're having several meetings to strategize and see how to move this along, because although things did not go the way we wanted, it was movement. Small and not in the direction we wanted, but movement nonetheless. So, you know, you try and be positive. It did open the door so that we can then meet with them again. So I think right now, tentatively, they're planning on meeting next week. They don't have a definitive date or time, but the negotiating committee is trying to strategize and come up with different things to move this along. Because at the end of the day, we do need to get back in there. The patients need us. Things, you know, they're having trouble on their end too, because now we're finding out that the police officers, their numbers have been cut. They got rid of the extra security company that they hired. They've had to, you know, I think they've had some problems, word is out, with some of their nurses, some of the nurses that they've brought in, the replacement nurses. You know, so things aren't going good for them. As much as we, you know, need a paycheck, need health insurance, and they're blocking that at every turn, they also are having issues inside there. So it really would benefit everybody to wrap this up and let us get back to work where we want to be.
And I think that's important, because they've been saying at every turn that the strike hasn't affected their operations at all, that everything's still going great inside, that the replacement nurses, the scabs, are, you know, doing the job just as well, and no patients are getting hurt or anything like that. And, you know, and you're saying that that's not true, and that there's news coming out from inside that's demonstrating that, you know, and I think it really has to be said here, patients are suffering because of this, but it wasn't the nurse's decision to make that happen. Tenet had over a year of where they could have come to the table with a new contract that addressed the problems. They could have, you know, they had every opportunity to prepare for this strike and to, you know, transfer patients somewhere else. That decision to put those patients at risk and the conditions that those patients are facing now on the inside at the hands of those replacement nurses, those scabs, that's on Tenet. That's their decision, right? And that's, you know, when you're talking about ending the strike, again, that's on them. They have all the power here. They have all the money. And I think that's, you know, I can see why it could be demoralizing to people on strike that the negotiations haven't started off, you know, on the right foot. Like you said, it's movement in the wrong direction. But I think it's also, it can remind people why you were fighting in the first place, right? For the safe staffing, you know, for good care. And, you know, you mentioned Tenet, what Tenet cares about is the bottom line here. Mm-hmm. And they have cash reserves. The day that the strike was called, they announced they had made a huge amount of profit. They put numbers to it. You know, I forget how much money, but it was like hundreds of billions of dollars. And they bragged about all of the stimulus money that they had gotten from the federal government, right? Taxpayer money. They bragged about how much they had gotten. And yet they're still unwilling to, you know, to pay, to hire these extra nurses, you know, to fully and safely staff this place. But you talked about the bottom line, so they've got money, they've got lobbyists, relations with politicians. They've got these scabs, the replacement workers. They've hired the city police. They've hired that private security company that you mentioned. All to make sure that scabs, replacement nurses can cross the line, that the picket line, that to make sure that customers, right? Because that's not how they view them. They don't view them as patients. They view them as customers, to make sure that customers keep coming so they can keep billing them. And so we know that the strike has been doing some economic damage to St. V's. There's been stories in the news about how much money they're cutting off their own nose to spite their face, in terms of paying huge amounts of money that they weren't willing to pay for hiring the nurses. They weren't willing to pay to improve conditions for you guys, but they're willing to pay that for these replacement nurses, these police details. But we also know that they've got strike insurance, which is something so absurd that you can't even believe that it's legal. They've got.
So somebody told me that, well, actually, Dave Schulmeyer was saying that that there's no such thing. I guess they checked into it, because a lot of us were like, well, we don't really know where this came from about the strike insurance. And when they checked into it, they said that no, there's really no such thing. Julie Pinkham, who's the head of the M&A, checked into it, and there is really no such animal.
So
they're essentially, this is all coming out of their pockets. And when they hire these nurses, they're paying them at a higher rate than they're paying us, and even the top nurses. And they're also paying for their room and board at hotels. They're providing them with food. So, I mean, they're spending all this money. Why not invest that in your people,
right,
in your company? Why spend it like that? You may as well just light it on fire and throw it up in the air. I mean, truly.
And I think, like you said, why are they spending this money this way? Why are they willing to take, because the strike's doing some damage, but they have very, very deep pockets, and they're betting that they can outlast the nurses, because we know that the strike's not just doing damage to the company, it's doing damage to the nurses. Like you said, you've lost, you're no longer getting paychecks, you're no longer getting health insurance. Nurses are looking for temporary jobs to try and make ends meet. The union has a strike fund, and it's trying to support its members, but the union doesn't have the same money as the company. And so I think really what this is they're spending this money because they'd rather break the union. They'd rather try and break the union than spend that money, than give in, right? They'd rather, they're trying to break this union. They'd rather burn this money than give in and let the nurses know, basically acknowledge that the nurses are the ones that have the power, that know what they're talking about, and that are on the right side of things. And, I think it's unfortunate. There's two other unions at St. Vincent. There's the UFCW 1445, represents some workers there, and Teamsters Local 170. I think it's really, I have to say that I think it's really unfortunate that this couldn't have been coordinated, to have all of those union workers out together, because then they would have had to be paying not just for replacement nurses, but for all these other replacement workers. And I think if this was 50 years ago, I think it would actually be a really big scandal that there were union workers still working at a place where other union workers were on strike. But I guess the next question is sort of, you mentioned and you used a phrase that I really like, actually. I'm probably going to steal it: turning up the heat, right? The strike vote was a way to try and turn up the heat on the company. So with this terrible offer that they've given, right, after 8, almost 9 weeks of the strike, they're moving actually not even in the right direction, they're moving in the wrong direction. Are there any sort of plans to turn up the heat more, right? To try and light a fire under them, to try and get them moving in the right direction? Because I think that's, with nurses having been out for this long and facing this much hardship on the picket line and in their personal lives, that's really what's needed is turning up the heat again.
So they're floating a few ideas around, but immediately, again, they do a lot of the work for us. When they do something foolish like this, all they're doing is getting us more upset,
right,
and making us stronger. So people were barely off the Zoom call and the phone calls started going out. Baker's office has been bombarded.
This is
All
Governor Baker of Massachusetts.
Yes, because we haven't gotten unemployment. And, they told us that's something that's not done on the federal level, it's done on the state level. So his office has been bombarded by calls. So have other representatives. Like, at the end of the day, it's great. We love that you come. We love that you're supporting us. But you need to do something now. And it needs to go up the chain. You just keep moving up. I mean,
so this is people like, Representative McGovern. There at the strike rally, there were a lot of nice words from a lot of elected officials. There have been several elected officials visited the picket lines and had nice photo shoots with the nurses, said a few words. But really what you're talking about here is there's words and then there's action. And Governor Baker's a Republican, but the state government is overwhelmingly controlled by the Democrats in Massachusetts. And these are the people who are saying they're on your side. And what you're saying is that, things like this unemployment payments, that's something that the state government can do. That's something the state government should be doing, and they haven't.
Right. Exactly. So everybody has, the majority of the nurses now have reached out to whoever their representatives are, locally and on up. Markey, McGovern, all of the ones who showed up. And I mean, I know that there are some of them who on a daily basis, like they've said that McGovern on a daily basis calls about unemployment. He has called Tenet in Texas. He has called Carolyn Jackson, to no avail. But that's the route now that we've taken. The nurses they were on fire Monday afternoon and Tuesday. People were posting, here are the numbers to call, here's what to say. So, and then we just keep doing what we're doing, showing up on the line and, hope for the best.
So you spoke at, I mentioned I'm a member of Independent Socialist Group, and we've been, we've been paying attention to what's been going on at St. Vincent's for years now. And like I said, we were involved with the Yes on One campaign. We were involved with the car caravans at the start of the pandemic. We've been going to, the informational picketing. We've been doing the strike visits. We've published material, interviews with nurses to try and spread the word about the strike, try and get as much support to the strike as possible. So one of the things we did was we organized a public meeting where we tried to get as many members of the public to it as possible. And we also got yourself and a couple other nurses to speak at that meeting and talk about the strike, why it's happening, and all that. And at that meeting, we raised some ideas of, you know, how can the strike keep up morale, right? How can we broaden out the support for the strike, spread the news to people, turn up the heat, right, on Tenet. You know, we know car caravans have been used in the past. We know that pre-strike rally, like I said, I think was a huge morale boost for everyone involved. You know, so we raised the idea of another rally like that. Mass pickets. You know, the picket lines. Like you said, the first 2 weeks they were bigger than they've been now because everything's harder now for the nurses. So really, these picket lines could use reinforcements, and you know, so the MNA has the latest numbers I saw was 23,000 members across Massachusetts. There's other nurses unions in New England. In Massachusetts in 2020, there were 350,000 union members in the state. You know, if other unions, if the MNA, if other organizations and things like that could, you know, bus people in, right, to Worcester to visit the picket lines, you know, I don't know, once a week or something like that, you know, we could have hundreds of people on these lines. You know, that could now you're talking about something that maybe scabs and customers can't get through. And so, you know, I think these are some ideas for how to turn up the temperature, like you said, and I know you said the union's talking about some ideas of how to turn up the temperature. And so I guess maybe the last question from me is, you know, for whoever watches this video or listens to this, what are ways that people can support the strike, can support the nurses? What are ways that people can try and make sure that the good guys win, right? That the nurses win. I know there's the picket lines are happening every day from 6 o'clock in the morning until midnight at all the entrances to the hospital. There's the strike headquarters at 11 East Central. People can park there and walk over to the hospital. It's right there. So visiting the picket line, there is a strike fund. We can, you know, we'll make sure to include the link to how to donate to the strike fund, because that strike fund is being used to help support nurses. People can write letters to, you know, the local newspapers to try and counter the you know, really the propaganda from the company. And there's other ways for people to help. So, you know, what would you say to people who haven't heard about this strike, or maybe who are on the fence about, you know, how they can help? You know, what would you say to them about how to help the strike?
I would say if you can come to the strike line, talk to us, talk to the nurses there. If you have questions, they can certainly answer your questions for you. And, you know, if you show up on the strike line, we know that you're supporting us. We see that, you know, we'll see you. I'm sorry, my son was trying to call me. So, you know, show up on the strike line, donate. We're not getting unemployment. We're using that money just to get by. Nurses are actually going to food lines to get boxes of food. Donate diapers. There are a lot of nurses that have little kids. Donate diapers, donate formula. Some people, some unions have come by, they've given us cards so that we can go food shopping to Stop and Shop. Any little thing helps. Just knowing that people truly see us, care, go by and toot your horn. If you can't do anything else, ride around the hospital, toot your horn, wave to us. Let us know that, that you're there, you support us, you see us, you care, that we're out there for you, because we're out there for Worcester, for everyone here. Box of Joe, bring a box of Joe to the line. It doesn't have to be anything really that big. It's even just the smallest of gestures really gives us strength, and and makes you takes you to take a breath and say, okay, I can do this. It's collectively, we're much bigger than them, even though they're a huge corporation. Collectively, we're bigger, and we're doing the right thing for the right reasons. So I would say anything that they can do would be helpful.
And it goes without saying, spread the news, share, the stuff that the nurses union is putting out on social media, share that with everybody. If you want to, the comments section of the local newspaper's Facebook page has been a war of, people putting out bad news and bad information, and nurses are in the comments section correcting them. Supporters of the nurses are there demonstrating that, Worcester's behind the nurses, not behind Tenet.
And let us to the editor too.
Yeah, right? Absolutely.
The editor, put your voice out there. Let them know that you see them for who they are and that you're behind us.
And so if you're a member of any organization, any union, any community group, if if you have family members, organize a visit to the picket line, organize a donation to the strike fund, write letters to the editor, share the news on social media, everywhere out there. So Johnna, I want to thank you for your time. Just before we wrap up, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to add for people watching this video?
No, I mean, of course, I would like to thank you and the time that you've given me, and in support of the strike. But I think finally, I would just say, I'm sure at one time a nurse at St. V's has taken care of one of your family members, has held their hand, has helped bring your child into the world, has been there at your most lonely moment. So I would ask that you be here for our time, for our moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so thank you, Johnna. I'll see you on the picket line, I'm sure, and hopefully anybody watching this video will, can find you on the picket line as well. And we're doing everything we can on our end to help win this strike. And I think the bottom line here is victory to the nurses, and let's win this strike. So thank you for agreeing to this interview.
Thank you. I'll see you soon.